Choice Hotels get you more of what you value. Here's a little tune to help you remember. Same drive, different day. Don't you wish you were getting away? Pack your bags and come on through. Texas, Ohio, Alaska, we're up there too. Comfort Inn, it's calling your name. Save on the stay. Oh, and free waffles are yours to claim. Well, I hope you like my little song. Book direct at choicehotels.com.
Welcome to Quiet Riot, the Cooler Heads podcast that believes light is the best disinfectant, clarity the best antidote, and an informed citizenry the best defence democracy has. I'm Naomi Smith.
And I'm Andreou, here to help separate what matters from the noise and remind you that you're not just a spectator in all of this.
All while proving that cooler heads and fierce hearts aren't a contradiction.
So take a beat, find your favourite chair, and settle down for another Quiet Riot. Hello and welcome to Quiet Riot. I'm Alex.
And I'm Naomi. And before we kick off, we have a save the date for your diaries. On Tuesday, the 16th of June from 6 until 7 p.m, we are holding our next online editorial meeting for all our gorgeous backers, because we firmly believe that Quiet Riot is something we create with, not at you. If you want to join in, make sure you're signed up for a £5 a month or more over at ko-fi.com/Quiet Riot Pod. Everyone who is a regular supporter by 11 p.m. on Sunday, the 14th of June, which is also Donald Trump's 80th birthday, you'll be...
Why did you have to
ruin it? You'll be sent an invite with a link. Kenny is our editor-in-chief and he'll guide you through the agenda, giving you a chance to help shape the future of our little show.
Now, this week, following the sentencing of the murder of Henry Nowak, his family's plea to turn this horrific and senseless crime into positive action rather than a political football appears to have gone unheeded. Instead, we are seeing a binary debate that suffocates nuance, incitement from political figures whose job should be to lower the temperature, and violence in the streets by professional agitators. So we thought we might try an entirely novel approach and actually try to be led by the facts.
And because that's understandably a heavy topic, we're lightening the load and bringing you a brand new regular feature. God Less America, where we delve into the shittiest of timelines to find out what truly bizarre story has barely been mentioned on this side of the pond.
Helping us with all this and more, making their Quiet Riot debut, it's Director of Research at ThinkLabour and Visiting Fellow at King's College London, Christabel Cooper. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for inviting me. Really pleased to be here.
Christabel, Labour Together has rebranded recently to become ThinkLabour. And that got me thinking about who my favourite celeb or organisation that's gone through a complete rebrand is. Who do you think has had the most brilliantly successful reinvention?
So I'm going to go for a rather nerdy political answer and say John Major.
Oh, yeah, good shout.
Because I am old enough to remember when John Major was regarded as the most useless prime minister that ever existed. And Private Eye used to do this series of 101 uses for a John Major, which featured him in these terrible Y-front underpants. And he was sort of being wheeled around being a wheelbarrow or a coffee table because he was too useless to do anything else other than that. And, you know, it's just extraordinary that he has completely rebranded himself as this incredibly wise and worthy elder statesman who pops up to make interventions that are universally regarded as wise and worthy, in contrast to some other former prime ministers that one might add. So, yeah, I'm going for John Major.
I think that is a great shout. Gone are the days of the traffic cone hotline. Back in is a John Major who actually we've got a bit of time for. Alex, anyone spring to mind for you?
John Major is a really interesting example. I was trying to think more, like what are the ingredients for a successful rebranding? I think John Major is quite a good example because I think there was a period where he said nothing. I think that's important, to kind of disappear and then reappear as this new person. and then intervention in moderation. I think if you start doing it too much, like some other former prime minister,
Indeed.
it can become tiresome and it can lose its sort of weight.
Yeah.
That, the reason his interventions have a sort of heft is because they're rare. And I mean,
A judicious
I'm a
use
gay
of
man of
former
a
Prime
certain
Minister.
age, so you ask me that question, I'm going to say Madonna. It's kind of obvious, isn't
The
it?
absolute queen of reinvention.
Like John Major, she went through her cone period. Hasn't quite reinvented herself as a wise elder stateswoman, but I'm sure that's to come.
There's time.
Around 11 p.m. on the 3rd of December last year, 18-year-old Henry Nowak, a first-year student at Southampton University, a well-liked kid with his whole life ahead of him, was murdered by Vikram Digwa while walking home from a night out. Digwa stabbed Henry several times with what he would later falsely claim was a Sikh ceremonial knife, resulting in serious internal bleeding. The killer chased Henry as he tried to escape, mocked him, and filmed him as his lungs filled with blood. His mother disposed of the knife. She has also been convicted for her part in this crime. Digwa's brother eventually called the police. It is unclear whether Digwa's family, several of whom were there when the police arrived, were knowingly complicit or simply taken in by Digwa's lies, just as the police initially were, that Henry had racially abused him, assaulted him, and crucially had not been stabbed. Henry tried to tell the police that he had been stabbed and couldn't breathe several times. In the heartbreaking bodycam footage released, one officer is heard replying, "I don't think you have, mate," while placing him in handcuffs and arresting him. Officers realized Henry was in serious trouble minutes later, called for an ambulance, took the handcuffs off, and tried to save Henry by performing CPR, but he died at the scene. They could not have saved him at any point, according to the coroner, but they did deny him any dignity or compassion in those final moments. They quite literally added insult to injury. The Independent Office for Police Conduct, IOPC, has already launched an investigation into the police force's actions that night. This week, Digwa was sentenced to life and ordered to serve a minimum of 21 years. Henry's family, through his father, Mark Nowak, spoke outside the court with extraordinary dignity and composure.
Today matters. Today, Henry was believed. The truth has been recognised. Today, justice, in the eyes of the law, has been served. But justice alone is not enough. We want to use Henry's heartbreaking story to make change for the better. We do not want his death to be used to create further division, hatred, or tension. We want his story to make our streets safer for everyone. This is not a case about Sikhism. This is not a case about racism. This is a case about murder.
Sadly, Reform leader Nigel Farage had different ideas, calling on people to respond with rage.
The biggest fear a police officer now has, going about his or her duty on the street, is the fear of being reported for having acted in a way that was racially biased. That fear, now greater than dealing with a dying man living on the ground. Henry's family have responded to this in just the most extraordinarily dignified way. But I suggest the rest of us respond to this with pure, cold rage.
And as night follows day, by that evening, far-right figures, Stephen Yaxley Lennon, a.k.a. Tommy Robinson, and Lawrence Fox were holding rallies outside the court in Southampton, riling up a gathered crowd, the thug subdivision of which then made their way to the street where the killer's family lives and had violent clashes with police. Naomi, can we start? There are loads of different strands and issues here. So can we first of all try and tease them out, separate them?
I think there are 4 strands, and I think it is incredibly important that we really disentangle them, because a lot of the bad faith in this issue relies on them being deliberately tangled up together. So first, there is the specific policing failure on the night. Officers were deceived by a killer's lies and who denied a dying boy basic compassion in his final moments of life. That is, as you say, the subject of an active IOPC investigation, and we must let that process run. Second, there's the broader systemic question about whether there are patterns in how police respond to victims and subject different suspects of different races to different force. And that is a legitimate conversation backed by evidence that I'm sure we'll talk about later, and entirely separate from any individual officer's intentions on the night given. Third, there's the political exploitation you mentioned, the attempt to use this specific tragedy to push a much wider narrative about white victimhood and so-called overcorrection. And fourth, and this is the one that really matters, there's the family. Mark Nowak, as you said, spoke with extraordinary dignity outside that court, and what he asked for was simple: do not use my son. And these four things are not the same conversation, and we do Henry a disservice if we let them collapse into one. The final point I would just make is about the comparisons to George Floyd's murder, which a lot of the far right have been making.
Because of those words, I think, I cannot breathe.
Right. George Floyd was killed by police.
Yeah. Big difference, isn't it?
The officers were the cause of his death.
Yep.
Henry Nowak was stabbed before the police arrived. He was murdered by Vikram Digwa. And the police in Henry's case made a catastrophic error of judgment. They were deceived and they failed him profoundly in his final moments, but they did not kill him.
And could not have saved him.
And could not have saved him. And so there is a morally and legally very significant distinction.
Yeah.
Quiet Riot. Starting or growing your own business can be intimidating and lonely at times. Your to-do list may feel endless with new tasks, and lists can easily begin to overrun your life. So finding the right tool that not only helps you out, but simplifies everything as a built-in business partner can be a game changer. For millions of businesses, that tool is Shopify. Shopify is the commerce platform behind millions of businesses around the world and 10% of all e-commerce in the US. From household names like Gymshark, Rare Beauty, and Heinz, to brands just getting started. Shopify has hundreds of ready-to-use templates that can help you build a beautiful online store that matches your brand's style. And you can tackle all the important tasks in one place, from inventory to payments to analytics and more. No need to save multiple websites or try to figure out what platform is hosting the tool that you need. And if people haven't heard about your brand, you can get the word out like you have a marketing team behind you, with easy-to-run email and social media campaigns to reach customers wherever they're scrolling or strolling. Start your business today with the industry's best business partner, Shopify, and start hearing. Sign up for your $1 per month trial today at shopify.com/realm. Go to shopify.com/realm. That's shopify.com/realm. Quiet Riot.
I read through the whole judgment because I wanted to get sort of the unfiltered official version of information. And I found it very interesting that the judge spoke about where the wound was, that it had pierced through a dark top, that the bleeding was almost entirely internal, because another thing I've heard repeated again and again was that he was somehow lying in a pool of his blood and the police didn't care.
The blood was
That's
pooling
not
in his
true.
lung.
It was exactly. The bleeding was primarily internal and the wound was not visible because it was on a dark top. I also did a little bit of research because I had a vague recollection of it into how similar the symptoms of hemorrhagic shock are to intoxication.
Yeah.
Like, because actually one of my impressions watching that body cam video is that if I had come across that person, my first thought would be that he was drunk, and he wasn't.
Yeah.
But the symptoms really, really mimic each other, like the lack of oxygen. Apparently what the body does is it it reserves all oxygen to keep the heart going, which makes the person uncoordinated, dizzy, their speech slurred, all exactly the same symptoms. I'm not saying this to defend the police's actions at all. I also think it's relevant that it was Digwa's family that called the police, and they were all there supporting a version of the story. And like I said, it was a difficult scene. It was dark. And the mistake lasted just over a minute. It was a catastrophic mistake, but it lasted a very short time. And so I'm not defending the police's actions. I think they fucked up. It seems quite clear to me. But I am saying that there are several plausible explanations to why they fucked up. And to not let the IOPC investigation ask what was in their minds while this was going on and come to a conclusion, but to jump to the conclusion that suits you politically seems to me just so cynical and cheap. Christabel, the implication here, I think, and this is where the George Floyd narrative is being sucked into this, because it is the MAGA narrative that any systemic sexism or racism in policing and the justice system has been all but eliminated, and the pendulum has now swung to victimizing white men. Is there any evidence of that? I mean, is that what is actually going on? Because there's a danger that if we accept that premise, then we're not going to be dealing with actual, real stuff.
As far as I'm aware, there is just no evidence of it. And I think that using this case, and I thought what you've just said was very eloquent and very well researched. I mean, I've read some of the extracts of what the judge said. And you're right. I mean, the police did make a catastrophic error, but it is an error that it's understandable. We can all see ourselves in that situation, making that kind of catastrophic error. And I think for really motivated political actors to say that this is almost incontrovertible evidence of institutional racism on the part of the police against white people, that's just not a credible claim when you look at what actually happened.
I mean, when was Louise Casey? That was like 2 years ago,
yeah,
wasn't it?
26.
The Casey report
24.
that basically said the exact opposite.
Yeah.
Systemic racism, systemic sexism, systemic homophobia still at every level of the police.
Yeah, I mean, we had those tapes from Charing Cross Police Station in London not that long ago, like demonstrating all of those things. Yeah. So to use this incident as evidence of institutional racism against white people is just not a credible story.
And facts matter, and we have to keep making them matter. I did look into some of the data around criminal justice statistics and stop and search, arrest, remand, sentencing, imprisonment. Non-white people and black people in particular are disproportionately represented relative to their share of the population. And
as Theresa May not so long ago fully accepted.
Exactly. And when it comes to children, and obviously he wasn't a child, but he was a child in the eyes of his parents. He was 18. We would all consider that a child still. The 5-year investigation that was published quite recently found that force was used in nearly 1 in 5 stop and search actions on children. And no further action was the most common outcome when the force was applied, and that black children were overrepresented in the use of force and were more likely to have their size, gender, or build cited as justification for heavy-handed policing. And what I don't know is how much training police get to spot injury. Yeah. And I would imagine quite a lot. So for the policeman to say, I don't think you have, mate, is that him forgetting the training that he'd had? Is it that the training was inadequate? Or is there some other thing going on there?
I saw one former chief of police who said that it's one of the most common things that people say when they've been arrested.
To try and get out, right, okay.
To try and get away.
Okay.
But, at the same time, look, we have to be adults about this, and we have to be even-handed about this. Being called on to make really quick decisions, I mean, it kind of relies on the preconceptions and first impressions. You have a very quick assessment of the situation, and so stereotypes affect that judgment. And maybe there is more training to be had. Maybe there is clearer guidance to be given. We mustn't be against any of those things, but they are the same preconceptions and stereotypes at work to an even bigger extent when police are dealing
with non-white people.
With non-white people.
Yeah.
And so actually it's the same problem.
Yeah, and of course that was at the root of the Stephen Lawrence case, where the police made an assumption that Stephen Lawrence, as a young black man, must be a wrong-un, that this must have been some kind of gang-based crime, and then failed to investigate properly, and the perpetrators were not convicted until a very, very long time afterwards. And I think some of the comparisons, some of the right have made the comparison with George Floyd. They've also made it with Stephen Lawrence. Yeah. I mean, in this case, actually, the perpetrator was caught, immediately, and has been brought to justice and will hopefully serve a large proportion of the rest of his life in prison. So, the idea that there's an equivalence between these cases just makes absolutely no sense.
And also, Stephen Lawrence was explicitly murdered because of racism.
Yes.
Alex, this is now the third summer in a row that Farage will have been accused of stoking division and encouraging unrest. Talk us through the pattern.
I mean, I am amazed at the amount of latitude that we continue to give this man. 2 years ago, he was just asking questions, I quote, with regard to the Southport stabbings, when he suggested that the police were hiding the facts of the case. Last year, he claimed police were busing counter-protesters to the Epping Hotel. That was the flashpoint of those protests. And when that turned out to be demonstrably untrue, his response was that he may have been wrong on the facts, but the gist of his point was right. This year, he's asking people to respond to this incident with pure cold rage. On Tuesday's Newsnight, an embarrassing and visibly embarrassed, I think, Lila Cunningham, who is Reform's London mayoral candidate, claimed Farage was not calling for anger, but was just naming it.
Do you think saying, in Nigel Farage's words, calling for rage has added to what we've seen on the streets in Southampton?
So when Nigel was talking about rage, he wasn't talking about rage against anyone. He wasn't talking about anyone hating anyone or any division. He was talking about rage at a system.
When you say rage at a system...
Yes.
Does that not lead to people throwing things at police officers in Southampton?
No, I think what's causing that anger is actually what happened. It's not Nigel Farage. He just named an anger.
They were fearful that this would be the reaction. And as a consequence of that, the family are now experiencing hate online. And that's not where we should be as a country.
Layla, I'll let you respond to that claim of incitement.
I think that video is what's incited this anger. It's incited anger in all of us. And naming that anger, as Nigel did in the video, is not what's causing division. In naming it, we can deal with it and make sure that Nowak never happens again.
Wow. Wow.
And it seems to me you have to go some way to actually get yourself into the mental gymnastics necessary to not see us directly calling for people to behave in the way we are seeing them behave. Farage's experience.
Yes.
He's slippery and careful with words, but he knows what he's doing. He knows what he's saying. And so, yes, he probably falls the right side of legal liability in terms of inciting. But what we're talking about here is not the criminal definition of incitement, but the ordinary meaning of the word. And on that basis, there is no doubt. This is precisely what Reform are doing here. They are actively looking every summer for tragic events on which they can peg their issues and amplify divisions. They're trying to foment unrest as a means of getting to an early election, very specifically, probably because they see that they have hit a polling ceiling.
Absolutely.
And are on their way down. And they've probably seen polling in Makerfield that does not look good for them. I think that's another thing playing into this. And the other thing that I want to say is that I think partisan figures further right. I think when we're seeing these spats and public pronouncements and fights that they have, I think that's a show. I really do. I think that's a show put on for us, whether deliberately or through a coincidence of objectives. They seem to me to be working in tandem. They seem to me to be creating political space for Farage to look more reasonable and moderate when actually he has moved further to the right.
Yeah. I mean, Rupert Lowe has condemned him.
I mean, when Rupert Lowe is to your left, you've got a fucking problem, right?
I mean, Christabel, what do you think about the why he's doing it now?
So I think I would disagree with you in that I don't think that Restore and Reform are necessarily acting in concert with each other. I think what's happened is that Farage is, as you say, a canny politician. He's arguably the most successful politician of the last 2 decades, very tragically for this country. He is looking down the barrels of walking into number 10 Downing Street in a few years' time. And he knows he needs to build quite a wide coalition. And he's been quite careful, I think, to not to alienate the sorts of people who are a bit nervous about voting reform, who don't think of themselves as being racist at all, who, did vote for other parties at the last election. So he's been quite canny not to alienate those people. But now he's seeing that threat on his right from Restore. And you mentioned the Makerfield by-election. The only poll that we've had from that constituency so far shows Restore on 7%. Now that, if that constituency poll was exactly right, would be enough to deny Reform taking that seat. The gap between Reform and Labour is only 3 points. So if all of that kind of right-wing vote consolidated behind Reform, that poll is saying Reform would win it. So I think Nigel Farage, I don't think it's any coincidence that his words have come out after that poll indicated that he is now facing losing some of his core support to an even further right party. What has been so tragic about the last couple of years is that, first of all, you saw this happening to the Tory party, that suddenly they saw this competitor on the right. So they sort of think, oh, God, we've got to move right in order to squash them. And then literally has the opposite effect. It legitimizes their views and actually they turn into the mainstream. And now it looks like you can just see Reform doing exactly the same thing. They think, oh, look, there's this other threat to our right. We've got to move right in order to counter that. And again, it's just kind of legitimizing even further right parties.
And we've just before we came to record the show, Ben Habib had said that he's going to consolidate his base in under Rupert Lowe for the Makerfield by-election. So really is trying to hurt Farage. So he will know all of that as well. And I just think we have to be completely honest about why it's happening now. As you said, Alex, Reform is appearing to hit a polling ceiling over the last few months. Their numbers are plateauing, if not falling back. And this could be the second by-election in a year that he really hoped Reform could win and start that march to number 10 that Christabel outlined. And so manufacturing unrest, creating an atmosphere of crisis is their route to forcing, I think probably an early election would also be something he'd quite like. And so tragic events just become in their hands, these political opportunities, all the while Henry Nowak and his family deserve so much better.
Just 2 points. I mean, I agree broadly with everything you said. All I would say is that to act in concert does not necessarily involve Nigel Farage, Tommy Robinson, Rupert Lowe and Ben Habib in traitors' cloaks in the turret, discussing what they're going to do. Your objectives can be very compatible. And we have seen this pattern, I mean, Farage knows that when he says this, it's not going to be Reform pensioners that go and riot in the street. It's going to be Tommy Robinson's lot. So he's actively using them as the more militant arm of his operation for his own reasons. And I'm not saying that they are doing it, in some kind of quiet agreement. But if I take your example about how that we've seen that pattern before of the Brexit Party at that point, creating space to the right of the Tories and forcing the Tories to move in that direction. How that ended was that just before the election, they made best friends. The Brexit Party withdrew from seats that they were contesting with the Tories, and Boris Johnson ended up with a big majority. So can I be 100% sure that all this panto fighting, 2 months before an election, they're not going to say, we're going to do the right thing for the country and not fight each other, and then just end up with a big majority?
I mean, I think the Brexit Party example is a really good one, because they had forced, by that point, the Tory party so far to the right. You know, Boris Johnson had negotiated a deal that was so far away from where, Theresa May had started, that by that point there wasn't any point in standing against the Tory party.
That's true.
So they kind of got what they wanted, and I imagine that's kind of what Rupert Lowe is thinking now. He is trying to drag Farage. I mean, I think, Rupert Lowe, I don't suppose, imagines that he's going to be Prime Minister after the next election. But I think his aim will be just to pull Nigel Farage away from those kind of more moderate voters that he's been courting, and really towards that kind of, really awful. I mean, it's almost, some of his policies are more right-wing than the ones advocated by the BNP in their heyday. Yeah. And I imagine, if he did succeed in getting reform to go so far to the right, he would be in the same position as Farage and sort of saying, well, OK, you've done what I wanted. Now we are in this place where a mainstream party in British politics is advocating throwing out people who were not born in this country or who have parents who weren't born in this country.
Quiet Riot. Quiet Riot.
Christabel, Henry Nowak's family have called for their child's death not to be exploited or degraded for political gain, which is probably the more accurate way of describing what's happened. Why are they being ignored by Farage and others?
I guess because they just don't care. I guess because they don't have any sort of sense of basic humanity. I mean, this is, I have a 20-year-old son who's in the first year of university. It is just unimaginable what has happened to that family. It is the worst thing that can happen to you. Yeah. And the fact that there is such lack of decency. Yeah. I mean, it just goes to the heart of what is wrong with their politics.
I mean, Zia Youssef on Channel 4 News gets asked by Matt Fry, the family have asked you not to do this. Why are you doing it? He does, credit to him, say, unimaginable grief they'll be suffering. Can't imagine how awful that would be. But we will not be guilt-tripped by anyone.
I mean, guilt-tripped? Wow.
Yeah. I mean, wow. Where are we? How has our political discourse...
But can I say that was in Farage's statement as well? There's a really important word in Farage's statement. He says the family have behaved with incredible, I paraphrase, but dignity and poise. But, he says, I think we should react with, pure cold rage. Yeah. That but for me is a direct acknowledgement that I don't care what you're saying. This is mine now for my purposes.
Completely.
And can we just have a little listen to the reaction Farage got in the Chamber of the Commons on Wednesday during PMQs?
They're the words of a grieving father who's lost his son. We do not want his death to be used to create further division, hatred, or tension. I think those words have resonated with people across the country. We must not allow this tragedy to be hijacked by anyone who seeks to divide us.
Yes. Nigel Farage. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Following the horrendous circumstances of Henry Nowak's death, can I urge the Prime Minister to consider this? It is now clear to growing millions in this country that we're living under two-tier policing. The anger that you saw spilling out in Southampton last night. And which is in danger.
Condemn the violence.
Which is in danger of getting considerably worse. Because if the public lose trust.
Condemn it.
If the public lose trust in being treated fairly by the police, can he take some action, end this divisive practice of two-tier policing, and make sure that all British citizens are treated the same?
Mr. Speaker, I don't believe there's two-tier policing in this country. I'm really shocked that he pretends to have respect for Henry's family and then acts in this way. They have lost their son in the most appalling circumstance. They make a simple plea of us as human beings to please not exploit that. That is their plea to us. We all need to reflect on those words of Henry's father. My response, and the response of others, to be fair, has been focused on the lessons to be learned so we can deliver justice. His response has been to appeal for rage. Rage. That's his response to a father who's lost his son and asked for that not to happen. Exploiting this tragedy to create grievance and division would be wrong in any circumstances, but to do it when the family are expressly saying, please don't, is unforgivable. It shows exactly who he is.
Do you think it's backfired a little bit? He seemed taken aback by how united everyone was in going, you've gone too far.
I do think politically it's backfired in the sense that, as I say, he's trying to assemble a coalition. He needs to get to about 30% of the vote in order to stand a good chance of being the largest party or getting a majority. As you pointed out, he's already back down at 25%. And I don't know if you saw Luke Trill's word cloud what people were asked for one word to describe Nigel Farage, and there's this big racist in the middle of it. So,
and some other stuff appearing around it, actually, that are very establishment politician coded, sort of oily and, not to be trusted.
Untrustworthy, If you're trying to assemble that coalition, and as I say, you're trying to get people who voted for other parties in the past, you're not trying, there's 14% of people who voted Reform last time, and they're their kind of like MAGA type base who love Nigel Farage and think everything he does is fantastic. But to actually stand a chance of being in power, you need more than that base. And those are people, and we do a lot of focus groups. They're doubtful about Nigel Farage. They know that there's something a bit off with him. They are a bit frightened of Reform coming in. But, sometimes they say things like, well, all the other parties have had a go. They can't be any worse, can they? But, it's a sort of can they with a real question. And then I think that they see things like this and they're like, they can. The answer is they can.
So, I also think the coalition across the country is one thing, but I think even the coalition within the political actors of Reform in and around it is interesting, because you do have a type of Reform voter who is maybe more akin to a UKIP style voter, a bit of a golf club bore, probably wears red trousers. I'm going into the whole stereotype thing here, but they do not want to be in the same club, quote unquote, as Tommy Robinson.
Exactly.
And that there is a classism that also creeps into this. And if Farage is seen to be hugging too closely that thuggish element of the far right, I think he'll find it difficult to hold together his own kind of internal coalition as well as
Can I say, I don't know if you've seen only highlights of Farage's statement. I wouldn't normally advise this, but it is interesting to watch the full statement. It surprised me. It goes on for quite a while and goes off in quite weird directions.
Trumpy.
It goes off in completely unrelated directions that are to do with his politics. And what that says to me, actually, Christabel, is that because he's not a fool, he's savvy. And what that says to me is that he feels that base is being threatened.
Exactly.
And he needs to secure that, and pronto, whatever happens to the floating, more moderate voters. Naomi, another sign of a little bit of progress, I guess, that I think we could look at, most mainstream news TV services, with a predictable exception, refuse to carry Farage's statement live, as they would have, I think, in the last couple of years.
Or on another topic.
Yeah, what do you think is going on?
I think it is progress, but I think it's fragile. And I don't think we should congratulate ourselves too much. The decision not to confer the legitimacy of live broadcasts on inflammatory statements matters, particularly after years of treating Farage as someone who simply must be platformed because of his political significance, despite at most points in time not being an elected politician.
And also because he will complain like a bitch if he's not platformed, let's be honest.
But so I think there are signs that some editors are starting to recognise that the act of broadcasting is itself a choice with consequences. But, and it is a significant but, the clip was everywhere on social media within minutes regardless. The reach was barely dented by the main broadcasters not running it. So what changed was the imprimatur of mainstream news, and that's not nothing, but it just doesn't solve this underlying problem.
And that chunk where he was going into different areas was missing.
Indeed.
That's important.
Yeah, that is true. The harder question the media still hasn't grappled with is its own role in creating the monster and the conditions where figures like Farage have this much power in the first place. And a decade of treating him as some kind of roguish outrider worth endless airtime has consequences.
Quiet Riot.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile with a message for everyone paying big wireless way too much. Please, for the love of everything good in this world, stop. With Mint, you can get premium wireless for just $15 a month. Of course, if you enjoy overpaying, no judgments, but that's weird. Okay, one judgment. Anyway, give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
Quiet Riot.
Christabel, I have a tough one for you, a tricky one. Zia Yusuf notably has been the point person on this and other stories like this, complaining to every news organization of anti-white racism. What are the sort of complex politics of using a non-white person as the agitator very much in these cases? And we see this increasingly both sides of the Atlantic.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a clever thing to do because you can't accuse him of being racist. I mean, of course, that's not true. Of course, anyone can be racist, and in fact, it's almost racist to say that somebody of colour can't be racist because of course they can. But I mean, it's an easy role.
It puts a white anchor. On his back foot, doesn't it?
Exactly, and for a white person to be the kind of more liberal person in a conversation with him, I think it sets up quite an uncomfortable dynamic. I mean, Ben Habib is, of course, the other example of another person of colour who has decided to adopt these bizarre far-right politics because it gives you an impunity. I think there's almost an attraction for some people towards that far right position because nobody can, it's very hard for people to.
And it was interesting that Gillian Joseph on Sky News, who is black herself, was able to stand up to him, I think, better than other commentators.
I mean, it's sort of, I'm not absolutely not putting them in the same bracket, but it's just as it's easier for Kemi Badenoch to kind of have a war on woke as a black woman. Rather than if she was than if she was white.
I mean, I want to come on to Kemi Badenoch actually to round this off, because I think, and this is not something listeners have heard me say a lot, I think she has reacted well to this. I disagree with everything she has said, but her tone and nuance of discourse has been the right side of statesperson-like, in my view, on this. And this is not something she does a lot, especially on security and defense matters. Listeners will have heard me complain a lot that she is demolishing the convention, that when we're talking about matters of war, you know, the opposition supports the government, and I think that's important. So she condemned Nigel Farage for saying white lives matter.
Yeah.
Zia Yusuf expressed outrage on every channel at the fact Badenoch apparently had selectively quoted his leader. Her former Tory colleague, Robert Jenrick, called her terrible for politicising Nowak's death. I'm not making this up. He actually said this. And then they followed this by putting out a political poster that selectively misquoted Badenoch.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So Badenoch condemns Farage. Yusuf does outrage at being selectively quoted. Jenrick calls Badenoch terrible. Then they put out a poster selectively quoting Badenoch. Like, it's all just positioning at a time when an 18-year-old boy is murdered.
And his family has gone,
please don't do that.
This.
Yeah.
Don't do exactly this.
Yeah. And look, it's what Christabel was saying about, will this work electorally for them? You know, they are playing the most horrendous game with the most horrendous situation that they think is going to work for their electoral outcome. And I do think that the evidence is mixed on it. The More in Common research does show that many Reform voters are tired of the culture war. They want politicians to talk about things that actually affect their lives, cost of living notable among them. So I do think that the appetite for all of this is not as bottomless as all of the aforementioned politicos pursuing it seem to think. But on our side, we need the politicians to meet that and be willing to make a very different bet and willing to say this is not who we are, trust that voters will reward them for it, because otherwise that right-wing shift and drag effect that Christabel talked about earlier is going to have a similar effect on our side. And we need that counterweight. We need that counterbalance, dragging it back to something more sensible.
What do you think of Shabana Mahmood's response to this? I thought she was quite good, but again, not a massive fan, generally speaking. I find her a little bit on the illiberal side, you know. I think that's perfectly run-of-the-mill Labour, by the way. I think, you know, sometimes centre-left parties will pull at state levers. It's kind of what they do. And so when it comes to security matters and policing matters, they will pull at state levers.
Yeah, you know, she's part of the government. She is Home Secretary. She is responsible for ensuring the safety of British citizens, and the safety of British citizens and people in this country was put at risk by a bunch of thugs the other night. Yeah. So absolutely, her response will be that this is unacceptable to attack the police in this way. So I mean, you know, you'd be surprised if she'd said anything else, really, I suppose.
I don't know. I think we've seen a few Conservative Home Secretaries in the last 4 or 5 years lay into the police. You know, Suella Braverman being a really notable example.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough.
That would have come out and said, police terrible, they're woke.
Yeah. No, that's. I had temporarily forgotten about the existence of Suella Braverman, and so thank you, Alex, for that.
I'm sorry about that.
What I'd like people to remember is that actually Britain is the most successful, multicultural, large democracy with a diverse community in the world. And we forget that. And we are sometimes, even progressives are in danger of subscribing to the far-right narrative that we are inherently divided. We're not. The people who were rioting on the streets last night, it was a small number. Even the people who were rioting in 2024, it was a few thousand people. I mean, they caused distress to millions across the country, nearly killed people. But it was a small number. And I think we do really need to remember that actually Britain is, by international comparisons, a far more tolerant and making far more of a success of having a diverse society than most other countries.
I completely agree with you. And I was so heartened watching the Arsenal fans in North London online. And, you know, you had Asian Arsenal fans out with their Bhangra jams, and you had, you know, white shaved head guys joining in and celebrating them.
Women in hijabs.
Exactly. There were black people, white people,
And
everybody. You know,
exactly.
And it was just joyful. And I was like, yeah. That's the Britain.
Not so joyful for me.
Not so joyful, but yeah, I know. Well, yeah.
Are you both Spurs fans?
I'm not a Spurs fan, but if all the kids at my primary school used to support Spurs, so I've kind of got a soft spot.
Yeah.
We need a call to action. So all please do think of one. Alex and I had a little mull earlier, and of course we are now just a fortnight away from the murder of Jo Cox.
The 10th anniversary.
The 10th anniversary, a decade ago since she was slaughtered. It sort of doesn't bear thinking about, you know, the what's happened since then. But the Jo Cox Foundation, set up in her name, continue to do excellent work, particularly around community building, movement building, resilience within communities. So if you can head over to the Jo Cox Foundation and spare them some of your cash, sign up to support their work, etc. We will leave a link in the show notes so that you can do that easily.
Quiet Riot.
Because we like to keep things fresh over here at Quiet Riot HQ, it is my enormous pleasure to introduce our brand new regular feature. There is a growing political tendency on the right of the UK that likes the idea of a strongman leader throwing his weight about and claims we should be more like America. But with US headlines constantly dominated by Trump's latest brain fart, we're not sure the low-level chaos going on underneath it all is fully visible to British audiences. Stories that could have brought down most former administrations pass almost unreported. So, each time we're going to select one such story for your delectation and despair. Welcome to the inaugural outing of God Bless America!
Hail to America and liberty, hail the story and the glory of democracy.
So, Alex, inaugurate us. What do we need to know?
When Donald Trump's Labour Secretary, Lori Chavez de Rema, stepped down a few weeks ago, Trump's spokesman, Stephen Chung, said that she was leaving, I quote, to take a position in the private sector, adding she has done a phenomenal job. Well, as details of why she has stepped down continue to emerge, I think phenomenal is not a bad adjective.
Go on.
So let me spoil this slightly by telling you that if you are trying to guess in which scandal direction this is heading, the answer is all of them.
Money, sex.
As the Daily Show put it, it's like she looked at the employee handbook and responded, challenge accepted. So Chavez de Rema, it is alleged, kept a stash of booze in her office, was frequently seen drinking at work, took her staff on a bonding night out to a strip club, spent department resources on personal trips and personal gifts, had an affair with a member of her security team. Now, I would urge some empathy for what her husband and family must be going through at this difficult time, especially considering that he was banned from her office after 2 female members of staff alleged sexual assault.
He being her husband?
Yes. Well, the best time to have an affair is when your spouse is at work. But I'm not entirely sure that having it at your spouse's work does not rather negate the benefits. This cannot get any worse, you would think.
Go on.
But last week, the New York Times revealed that her staff were also being harassed by her father. And if you're beginning to feel sorry for Lori, delay that reaction. The same New York Times piece found correspondence in which Mrs. Chavez de Rema instructed young women in her staff, I quote, to pay attention to her men.
Oh, my God.
So Along with Pam Bondi, Kristi Noem, and Tulsi Gabbard, she's only the fourth senior member of the Trump administration to step down, and you may or may not have noticed what those four people have in common. God bless America.
Well, thank you, Alex.
Thank you, the right.
Yes, because
I mean, how have we not heard about this?
Well, I hadn't even heard of her. I didn't recognise the name.
Right?
I'm not surprised when I hear Trump has fired somebody from his top team. I'm like, oh, it'll be a woman. Yes, it was a woman. I did not expect any of that. That is good tea.
Yeah.
And
he's running out now, so I think Kash Patel might
it'll
be
have
next.
to be a bloke.
Yeah, it'll go down to the brown people.
Okay. Well, thank you for introducing our new regular feature. And listeners, if you stumble across any particularly juicy nuggets from the other side of the pond that are just not getting reported here, feel free to send them in to quietriotpod@gmail.com.
Quiet Riot.
And that is the end of this week's show. Our enormous thanks to Christabel for making your Quiet Riot debut.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Listeners at home, thank you too for tuning in. And don't forget our editorial meeting is on the 16th of June at 6 p.m. for everyone signed up for $5 a month or more over at ko-fi.com/quietriotpod.
Christabel is going to be back with us tomorrow for Quiet Riot B-side, so do tune back in for that when we're going to be grilling her about who the Labour Party is actually for. In the meantime, remember to check out the other shows in the Cooler Heads wheelhouse, Podyssey and Behind the Lines.
We love you mucho.
Bye.
Bye.
Quiet Riot is an audio production by Cooler Heads with Naomi Smith and Alex Andreou. Produced by Kenny Campbell. Music by Mariana Sangeeta. Artwork by Simone Canelu. And edited by me, Alex Reese.
Quiet Riot.
No blooper reel today. Have a listen instead to these very interesting, edited main points of a much longer video that Nigel Farage put out in March 2021 when he thought the left was instrumentalizing a murder in order to turn it into a wider anti-police protest. I will include a link to the full video in the show notes so that you can have a look, if you want, to the full 6-minute context of it.
Frankly, for those that have been behind many of these demonstrations, ongoing demonstrations, a white male in his 40s with a shaved head was in many ways the ideal person for them to be seen to be protesting against, and even better for those who wanted to make political capital out of Sarah Everard's death. He was a serving police officer. Sarah's murder was caused by the appallingly bad act of one individual. It wasn't the fault of all men. It wasn't the fault of all the police. And these demonstrations keep going, and they're turning into anti-police demonstrations. And the newspapers wall to wall have been critical of the way the police behaved in Clapham. Political leaders critical of the way the police have acted. This is now becoming an anti-police campaign. And I just want to appeal to newspapers and to politicians and to simply say this. I'm as critical of the police at times as anybody, but I might be critical of individual actions or individual officers in the police force, but I know the vast majority of men and women serving in our police forces are doing their absolute level best to maintain law and order on our streets, and their morale is sinking to a low. We must not allow the horrible murder on Clapham Common to be turned into an anti-police movement, and frankly, an anti-men movement too. We've got to wake up to the fact we are being played, and the effect of all of this is very corrosive on society.